Today I'm going to be taking the first steps towards creating Shohin bonsai from nursery stock material. In particular, I'm going to be talking about taxus or yew trees. So let's go and get one now and we'll have a look. What's happening, bonsai friends? Let's talk tiny taxus. A bit later in the video I'll talk about the timing for the work that I'm going to be doing today, and I'll also talk a bit about selecting material and what to do with it once you've obtained it. The work we'll do today is to chop this excessively tall trunk right back, and we'll also prune any remaining branches, and that is hopefully going to stimulate plenty of new buds to form on and around the trunk so that we'll have plenty of options to build branches from and a future apex. Let's dive in. In the upper reaches of this tree, it's produced a really good flush of growth last year with about 16 centimetres of growth. All the way down these upper branches we've got some really beautiful buds forming, and the foliage is a gorgeous dark green colour. Before I go any further, let me just clarify, if you're not familiar with the term Shohin, it's a size classification of bonsai that came from Japan, and it refers to trees that are approximately no taller than 8 inches in height. I'll aim to chop the trunk somewhere around this height. So first, let's just whip some of the unnecessary branches that are taller than the future apex will be, just so I can see what's going on. Get the saw in there nice and comfortably. Take some of these wispy bits out. Anything that's going to obscure my view of what's going on when I'm doing the chop. I don't have to be too precise because all of this will be cut off. We've got some pretty long branches along here. I'm also going to cut these right back so that I've got a bit more room to work in and around the tree. So let's start with this piece. Taxus wood really hard, even those younger branches are quite tough to cut through. As long as I leave plenty of green, I know that I can cut quite hard. I want to leave a little bit of foliage because that's going to really power the recovery of the tree. And then we've got this huge piece that's stroking me in the face. For the time being, I'm going to take these pieces out just to get them out of the way, but in all likelihood I'll be cutting these back even further in a little while. Just look at all those beautiful buds that are forming. Okay, we're almost there with the rough prune. Just a couple more bits to go. Now I'll come in with the saw. Voila! Okay, so we can see a little bit better what's going on now. Let's have a look around the tree. Right, we've almost got a couple of sub-trunks down here, so I'm just going to do a bit more pruning around this sub-trunk. Let's see what's going on, it would probably help. There we go. You can see a little bit better what's going on in here now. Got back some of these smaller pieces. We don't need more coming from the base. Now that I've got the majority of that heavy pruning out of the way, I'll just talk a little bit about the timing and what I did to get to this stage. In terms of selecting material for Shohin, in particular taxus, in my area I really have a really hard time finding decent yew material. In fact, it's just non-existent. So what I end up doing is I'll troll the garden centres and tree and shrub nurseries, looking in the hedging section for interesting pieces of taxus material. And what you tend to get is cookie cutter hedge material that are all pretty much dead straight. Some are bushier than others, some are a bit taller than others, some have got slightly thicker trunks, some are thinner. Occasionally though, if you look really carefully, you'll come across one or two that have subtle features that make them just that little bit more interesting for this level of material. Oh, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that would really help me out. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. Thanks. So the first point that I like to look out for is that buttressing base. In fact, I don't think I would bother to even look further if it doesn't have at least a slight buttress to the base of the trunk. It doesn't have to have loads, and you're not gonna find a fully formed, beautiful bonsai nabari in a £10 piece of hedging material unless you're very lucky. But you want to see at least a bit of a flare, otherwise there could be the worry of inverse taper below the soil line, and it's sometimes worth having a little poke around the soil surface at the bottom of the trunk just to get a feel for what's going on underneath. A couple of times I've noticed individual pieces of material that almost have two separate root systems where they've been grown in a pot and they filled that pot, they're then transferred to a bigger container, backfilled, buried quite deeply and backfilled, and then they form a second root system near the new surface of the soil. So that's something to watch out for. I've actually got one of those in the garden right now. Hopefully the upper root system becomes strong enough that I can sever the lower root system, and we'll see where we can go from there. I don't know. We'll see. Another feature that I look for with these small, cheap Taxus trees is these branches that are coming from the base of the tree. And I like those for two reasons. The first is that it does give you the option to create a multiple trunk tree if you wish. Don't see many multi-trunk yew bonsai, but at least it gives you the option if you so wish. But the more important reason for me, at least, is that I know that I can use those lower branches as sacrifices to really thicken the base, and then when they've served their purpose we can remove them or create some deadwood, and it just really helps to create that nice wide base at the bottom and add an air of maturity to the finished tree. So definitely keep an eye out for those. The final feature that I'll look for in hedge or nursery stock Taxus is any interesting movement to the trunk, or maybe a lowish branch has some interesting movement. They tend to be pretty ramrod straight, so just any deviation or movement, and there's a little bit of subtle movement through this one. It's not massive movement, but it's just enough to make it stand out from all the hundreds of others that you look at. And any branches that you can find low down, always worth a look. It gives you something to chop to or to work with in the future. Another thing that I tend to notice with these Taxus nursery stock trees is that the better examples tend to have been sat around for longer in the nursery. So they often are quite pot bound. They may have infestations of critters in the pot munching away on the roots. The foliage may be showing signs of stress, yellowing, browning. Sometimes you can see that the plastic containers are slightly misshapen, where the roots have really filled the pot to such an extent that they're bursting at the seams. Another sign to look for is discoloration in the foliage. And I mean discoloration that isn't typical of the variety or the time of year. There are some yellow-leaved varieties of yews that you can get. I personally don't bother with them, just because I prefer the green foliage. If we attempted this work on one of those Taxus which are showing signs of poor health, we're just not going to get a really good response. I think what I've done so far is to first sort out the root system, which is usually the cause of ill health in these nursery stock yews. they become pot bound and then start to suffer. So I like to liberate them from that nasty soil, get rid of any grubs that are munching away at the roots, and get them into some better quality, free draining soil where they can really spread their roots, establish a nice, healthy, strong root system, which in turn causes the tree to regain its health. And then we come in and do this work and get a much stronger response. In terms of the timing, I am referencing Ryan Neal of Bonsai Mirai. In a stream on Taxus, Ryan gave some advice about the timing of when to do heavy pruning works in order to compact the growth of yews. His advice was to wait until the first freeze of the winter and then come in and do the pruning work that needs to be done. And what will happen is the tree, as a result, will produce loads and loads of buds right back on that remaining older wood. There were a couple of points to bear in mind. First of all, the tree needs to be pretty damn healthy. If you perform this operation on a weakened tree, the results are going to be a lot less predictable at best. At worst, you could end up with a very poorly yew. So make sure the tree is bursting with health, showing lots of growth, good buds, good extensions before you consider such aggressive work. The next point to bear in mind is that you need to make sure you leave some foliage on any areas that you would like to survive. Otherwise it can become a bit hit and miss as to whether the branch will develop buds or die back. And his last point was that the tree mustn't experience freezing temperatures from here on in, so a bit of protection may be necessary depending on your climate and where you are in the world. Obviously I have to point out that I'm not sponsored by Bonsai Mirai, and I would say that if you want more info, definitely subscribe to the Mirai Live service. With all the big cuts out the way, I just need to do a little bit more pruning because it's a little top heavy. I want to maintain plenty of foliage up here so that we don't get dieback, but at the same time there's just more here than we need. So let's take some of these pieces out. I'm never going to use this branch. I'm not going to use this branch in the design. So I'm going to take those two pieces off in order to prevent any shading of buds below. Let's do this one first. And here we go with this piece. Now this area is looking a bit dense. Again, we're not going to need this great big horizontal branch, and this one can come right back as well. Now some of these finer pieces. We're cutting back quite aggressively, but ensuring that we leave some needles in place. Cut these pieces right back as well. We don't want this to be the strongest part of the tree once it starts to grow. So I can almost guarantee that all of the growth from this point upwards is never going to be used in the final design. It's also debatable whether we'll use anything from here upwards. But I've left all of this growth in place in order to continue drawing sap throughout the trunk to really reduce any risk that there might be that dieback would occur and would subsequently, maybe I'm being unreasonable, but would subsequently result in us not getting buds in these areas, for instance. By keeping this foliage here, it's going to continue to draw sap through 360 degrees through the trunk, and it's going to really maximise the chance that we'll get buds throughout, and then we'll be able to come back at a later date and cut back to any new growth and really start to bring out the design that we really want. For the time being, I'm just going to have to put up with this tuft up here that we'll never ever use. It's just necessary for the time being. Sacrificial growth to ensure the health of the tree and prevent dieback. We do have some little buds down here, and by keeping this growth in place, we can be extra confident that they will grow and develop next year. I just worry that if I cut back down here now, there would be a risk that these wouldn't develop. The risk might be slim, but if there's a simple way to get around any risk that may be present, why not? This sub-trunk that's coming out of the base actually has a nice bit of movement to it. Depending on what we've got down here, it might be that this is included in the design. It might even be that this becomes the tree. I doubt that'll happen because this is quite a meaty sacrifice if this were to be the main trunk. But who knows, it might be that the base lends itself to this becoming the next trunk, so I'll leave that there for now and we'll see what it looks like when we come to repot at some point in the future. But as I said, this tree is going to go out into a protected area. I don't get horrendous freezes in my area, but I will, just to be safe, I will protect it from the worst of the frosts. And then in the spring, hopefully growth will resume with great vigour. I'll continue watering and fertilising as heavily as I always do, and hopefully we'll get rapid development and I'll bring you some updates in the summer. Alright, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, hit that like button and drop me a comment, let me know how you're getting on.